We chose Josephine Baker as our living figure. I'm Keely. I'm Sophie.
I'm Anthony. Josephine Baker was an African American woman who was born on June 3, 1906 in St. Louis, Missouri. Both of her parents were not in the picture while growing up. Josephine's father left her and her mother also did leave her shortly after she was born. Josephine dropped out of school at 12 years old. She babysat for wealthy white families and managed to be a waitress at a club. She was married 3 times and divorced all of them. Also did not need any financial support from her marriages. Josephine Baker passed away on April 12, 1975 in Paris, France. Baker died in her sleep of cerebral hemorrhage, which is a stroke that can rupture rupture blood vessels and cause bleeding inside the brain. Today on Baker's funeral, more than 20,000 people filled the streets in Paris to witness the procession. The French government honored Baker with a 21-gun salute, which made her the first American woman to be buried in France. Josephine Baker will be 111 years old by now. Josephine Baker was most known for being a French performer and dancer during the World War II, highest paid and most popular in Europe, and also will perform in her famous skirt made out of 16 bananas. In addition, thousands of dolls with banana skirts were sold all throughout Europe.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Okay, so I think to really understand Josephine Baker's journey, it's really important to understand what was going on in the time of her upbringing. So when she was growing up and wanting to be a performer, black performers were not welcome in America. She was told many times that she was too dark and too skinny to be a performer. And she was, one of the main historical events that happened during this time was the St. Louis, Illinois riots in 1917, and that was, that event is actually kind of a bit of a hidden figure itself. But it was 3 days of violent race riots when 470 African American workers were hired to replace white workers who had gone on strike against the aluminum ore company, and people got really upset, and it was estimated that I think it was 40 to 100 people died. There was different numbers, African American people died. And so Josephine Baker actually ran away and survived this riot, which is very, shows her perseverance, and it also shows how awful it was to be African American during this time. There was no opportunities for anyone like her in America, but in 1925 she moved to France to go to La Revue Negre, and that started her performance career, and she became a very famous celebrity in France and Europe. And in 1936 she returned to the U.S. to star in the Ziegfeld Follies, but that proved disastrous because even though she was a major celebrity in Europe, the U.S. wasn't ready for it. American audiences didn't like the idea of a black woman with so much sophistication and power, and the New York Times actually called her a quote-unquote Negro wench, which really shows that timing is really important, because now the New York Times is such a respected news source, and it would be very unheard of for anyone to say that. But it's possible that if she was born at a different time, she could have had a different life. So that's the riots in St. Louis, and this is her poster at the La Revue Negre. And so what many didn't know about her was that she was actually a spy during World War II. She originally supported Mussolini's invasion to Ethiopia, so the Axis powers thought that she was one of them, and she would perform for the Axis powers and listen in on their conversations before and after shows. And she wrote a bunch of information down on her sheet music, because when she would go on a plane or a train, they would not even think to check sheet music. So it was very smart of her, and she gave that to French resistance agents. And after after the war, she was awarded the Medal of Resistance by President Charles de Gaulle.
De Gaulle.
I don't know if I'm, huh?
De Gaulle.
De Gaulle. And named her a Knight of the Legion of Honor. So she had a lot of accomplishments during her life. And this is her with all of her medals. So continuing, what many don't know about Josephine Baker is she participated in a lot of social justice acts. One being she adopted 12 children, and they were known as the Rainbow Tribe. And this is because they were all ethnically and religiously different, and that was one of the points she was trying to say, is that even though they were different in these ways, they were the same and they could still be brothers and sisters. And she was also a spokesperson for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is a civil rights organization that's still going on now. I believe it started in 1906. But their goal was to fight for equality and eliminate race-based discrimination. And she also participated in the historic March on Washington in 1963, which is where she spoke next to Martin Luther King Jr. when he gave his I Have a Dream speech, and she was the only woman to speak at that rally. And lastly, to top it all off, she served with the French Red Cross as a sub-lieutenant in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, which I think is super cool because back then women weren't full-on leaders, that was more the men. That's how they were looked at, and she was doing that. And then why we think America doesn't know her is because they didn't accept her as a performer. As Sophie had said, they said she was too dark and too skinny. So based on her race and gender and how she was super unconventional, she didn't conform to social standards in America. She divorced 3 times, she adopted 12 children, and she wore not so conservative attire. In a video, she dances around topless, which back then is just not, women were seen as modest and covered up, and they were supposed to be the stay-at-home wives and take care of the children, and the men made the money and all the hard labor and whatnot, and she never financially depended on a man, so she was really defying all the social standards of a woman back then. And lastly, we say no for just performing, because as we went along with this, I think we found that a lot of older adults, they do know of Josephine Baker, and not so much our generation, so I think it's really important to remind everyone who she was. And also thinking about it, a lot of people know her as a performer, because that's how she made her big debut, and that's who she was. And I think a lot of things that are hidden about her are the aspects of her life where she did all the social justice acts and adopted 12 children and everything like that, and those are really important things that were hidden. And she also had a pet cheetah named Chiquita. Fun fact. So I think it's definitely really important during Black History Month because our generation and all the generations coming up, you have to keep alive like all these really important people that could become hidden. And yeah, that's all. Thank you.